But in terms of community, so I went in with a friend and then I walk out and I met the girls that ended up baptizing me. And I joined a small group that day. So they're called B groups, our small group, and met like some of my dearest friends.
What is going on, everybody? Thank you so much for tuning in today. This is Beyond the Surface. My name is Ryan, and in today's episode, I interview one of my friends, Hunter, to talk a little bit about her faith journey and what it looked like for her to step out of Catholic faith and into Christianity. We also dive into why she felt she was called into ministry and how she became part of the staff at my local church. This is a really good episode, and we're super excited for it. We hope that you're encouraged by it. If you are, we would love for you to click that subscribe button on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or Spotify. We'd also really appreciate it if you would share this episode with a friend. But now, without further ado, let's jump on into the conversation. All right, so this week for our episode, we decided to bring on a guest, and it's somebody that I volunteered alongside with at church for a few years now. And we think she's awesome, and she's got a really cool story. And she's actually on staff at Ezra and I's church now, and her story of kind of how she got there is pretty cool. So we figured we would just go over that and kind of explore her journey. So Hunter, why don't you just introduce yourself? Maybe you could talk a little bit about, how we met and then kind of what you're doing at the church right now.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name's Hunter. Ryan and I started serving together 3 years ago. So I've been at the same church with Ezra and Ryan for 4 years. And then we serve in high school ministry. So came to know the Lord 4 years ago at our local church. And then really just kind of dove in. Our church is healthy and has a lot of means for us to connect and build community. So small groups were a huge part of that. Serving in high school was a huge part of that. And along the way, I ended up on staff at our church and working in ministry. So.
Did you ever see yourself working in ministry?
No. So I grew up Catholic. And so even my understanding of what ministry was and as a woman, what that looked like was very different. Wasn't really something I saw for myself. And I even had questions about faith in general and God in general. When I first moved to Kalamazoo and started college and even walked away from my ministry was absolutely not on the radar at all. I actually pursued science. So I wanted to be an occupational therapist. That was kind of the lane that I was running in. Was working at an outpatient physical therapy clinic and loving it and was on track to go to grad school. And in coming to know the Lord, I think my dad gave me a Bible in the spring of 2018. And midsummer that year, I was reading in Ephesians. And the first time I had a verse ever jump out to me or kind of be highlighted was Ephesians 3:9. And it says to make this mystery of the administration plain to all or something to that effect. And it's jumped out at me so much so that I wrote it down in my Bible. Years later, I realized that was a calling verse. And so last year 2 years ago in 2020, I was working at that physical therapy clinic and was really feeling kind of a pull to not necessarily go into ministry, but was just kind of feeling the Lord wanted me to pick that up and kind of just reconsider because I had lived most of my life making my own decisions, kind of planning my own route and track. And I hadn't really brought him into my career per se because I was so far along in school and in the natural, that just doesn't practically make sense, So at that point I did that, had a conversation with our pastor and really took the Lord up on it and kind of started praying and, things started being kind of pulled for me in terms of where I was looking in terms of grad schools that I was looking at. Long story short, I ended up just having a year long wrestle kind of with the Lord about what ministry looked like and what it looked like for me. And that calling verse was something that really helped me frame that out, I guess.
Yeah, that's super cool.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to unpack there, obviously, and we'll get to a lot of it. But let's go back to, so you said you grew up Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
Were you kind of the go to church on the big holidays, or was that something that your family was pretty consistent with in your faith?
Yeah.
What did kind of that aspect of your faith look like when you were growing up in high school, et cetera?
Yeah, definitely. Catholic means a myriad of different things to everyone. So we went every weekend. So every Saturday went to Saturday Mass, though my brother and I made it a habit to if we knew if we could get mom to take a nap at about 4:00, then we'd get out of mass at 5. So
Nice.
that was like always the goal. And then every Sunday I went to catechism, which is kind of like our youth group. So I did that faithfully all throughout elementary, middle school, high school. Yeah. So we went consistently, but my parents are divorced. And so my dad never went to church with us. And he grew up Seventh day Adventist. So he had a religious background. And then my mom just grew up Catholic and my grandparents were Catholic. And so that's kind of like the religion of our family. And it was something that we needed to do. So my mom went and we were really diligent about going, but I don't think any of us really knew like why we were. And we didn't, I don't know, like prayer wasn't really something we did at home. So we weren't like the best practicing Catholics, I guess, but we were involved in the church. Yeah, that's kind of how I remember it.
So what would you say now, kind of being in the same boat as Ezra and I, where
Yeah.
we don't really consider our Christianity like our religion? We consider it
Mhm.
more of relationship with Jesus, and kind of like a daily walk that we choose. How would you compare that to kind of the Catholic teaching that you grew up? Like, what are some of the differences?
Yeah. Well, I think I always come back to like, I'm really grateful for kind of like the habits that were laid in spite of like, pushing mom to nap to go to service because it was like, that was just part of my childhood. It's what we did. And whether I recognize it or not, like I was still in like the house of the Lord. And whether I knew him to be Jesus or not, I was still in God's house. And that was like something concrete to me about like, that's just part of my life. We like schedule around that. And I'm like verbalizing it to my friend groups and things. So I have like I think it like solidified reverence for the Lord. So I'm really grateful for that. But yeah, obviously, from my experience, it was very religious in the sense like prayer is a huge deal. I think that's one thing, the biggest thing that floors me the most, I think, in terms of differences and what my relationship with God looks like now versus then. It's just like, well, Jesus, like the access point, the entry point into being able to talk to God and knowing God as Jesus Christ. So I think that floors me. Like I remember vividly, like a Christmas mass where I was weeping because I had the revelation that Jesus was a real person and that he died. And I was so distraught of like how he died. And but knowing him just as a person that died and just kind of having empathy in that sort of way, but not knowing that he died for me or that he died for the person to the left and to my right and in front of me and behind me. So that sticks out to me too, I think. So yeah, I think prayer is like the thing that stands out and just having like a daily relationship with God and knowing that he wants one with me. It's not just a matter of me like doing works or like striving to get there on my own, that like Jesus paid that price for me.
Yeah, I think that that's really cool, and I think that is kind of the key is
Mhm.
that relationship with Jesus Christ and recognizing who Jesus is. So I was reading a book not too long ago, and it was about a doctor, and he grew up in a Jewish household,
Okay.
and he kind of described the same thing. He came into realization of like who Jesus was and the wisdom of Jesus's teachings,
Hmm.
and he stayed committed to his Jewish teachings for a long time, but he just really wrestled with that, like you can't deny the wisdom that Jesus had. And then he had a personal encounter where he just was basically on his knees weeping and praying to Jesus this time instead of God. And he said the connection that he felt there was just undeniable. And that's when he transitioned to Christianity. And so
Wow.
he just kind of talked about in this book how his story was never the same after he came to that like
Yeah.
realization that like we were walking out with Jesus each and every day. And that's kind of what's different. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's super cool.
Yeah. Those like first encounters. I will say, like, when I first came to know the Lord, so that would have been in April of 2018. In November of 2018, I went through a really bad breakup, like heartbreak. And I think I had a similar like encounter with Jesus. Like Jesus became really real to me. I think my heart was really ready for him, like in April. It was kind of like everything that I was seeking because I was struggling in my Catholic faith, as I mentioned earlier, just like feeling like it was kind of hollow and like if this is it, like I go into service, no one knows my name, like I can't even serve if I wanted to. Like it's just kind of this building that I go to and we sing and we kneel and I take communion and it doesn't really amount to anything else. And so I think community was really how like the Lord met me and like brought me in initially into just having my yes. But then he became like really, really personal to me in that breakup because it was like I was with the person for almost 4 years and it was like daily. I just started the job at the clinic. So I was trying to like save face there, but like I was crushed to nothing and like the kind like getting out of bed, couldn't breathe. I didn't eat for like 3 weeks. Like, well, I mean, I had like peanut butter. This is so sad. I would make like a piece of peanut butter toast and I would take that in the morning. And that was like all I would like be able to eat throughout the day, like kind of stomach. And it was a lot of just like every minute, just like running to the bathroom, like looking back, it's crazy. Like my eyes were red and puffy. Like I was just so devastated. But like the Lord really met me like every single night when I would come home. I remember there was a lot of like crying in the shower and like worship was always on, sermons were always on. But I feel like the Lord really taught me about like how he meets us in our anguish. And like when we really truly are, like I think it's a verse in Proverbs, maybe like the Lord is close to the brokenhearted. He rescues those who are crushed in spirit. Like, man. And I clung to that and I clung to Proverbs 3:5. Like, that's when I first found a life verse because it was so hard to get out of bed and just like go on with life. But I like confessed over my life every morning. Like, I trust the Lord with all my heart. I will not lean on my own understanding. And submit to him in all of my ways and he'll make my path straight. And so I think all throughout that first year, daily, there was just like God marked moments. And so I get that. Like, if you have grown up in sort of like a religious household, or not even household, but just upbringing, like Jesus is so personal. And so that, I don't know, that's just so sweet. And it just gets sweeter and sweeter, like as I get to know him more and more.
So, but you said at one point you had kind of walked away from your faith. Was
Mhm.
that in high school back when you were at home, or was that kind of in college once you were on your own? I know one of the biggest things that college students struggle with, Christian college students struggle with, is a lot of them don't find a church to get planted in.
Right.
And then you end up drifting away. And then the longer you're away, the harder it is to get back. So, kind of what was your experience with that?
Yeah. So I kind of pointed to it earlier. So we were Catholic, but we weren't the best practicing Catholics. And my mom, my parents are divorced. So my dad was very much involved in my life, but wasn't in our household from middle school. So from 14 on. And my dad, I think in his religious upbringing, like upheld quite like biblical viewpoints of life, kind of like conservative ideals, like just biblical ideals, really. And my mom was quite liberal in her thinking, and so this is getting somewhere. So in catechism, when our senior year, I was like one of four seniors who had finished like stuck with youth group essentially because it was a lot. It was it was just a lot of reading and boring and it was dry. Jesus wasn't in it. Like, and so we made it through. And so we got this gift from the church. We got to go to the Right to Life March. And at the time, I would have said I was pro choice. But I saw the value in like still going because I didn't really know why I was pro choice. Like, I just kind of was like, well, I'm not convinced like either way. And so we were offered this gift, and I wanted to be honest because our priest like came down and offered it to it, made it clear that like the parishioners had funded for it. And, it was a huge gift. So I, looked him in the eye and said, like, was just honest that I can't go and participate, but I would love to go to just like be with my peers and like be around people that I haven't had the opportunity to be around. Like, simple as that. He was my spiritual leader and I didn't think anything of it, which in hindsight seems like super naive, but I also think it's exactly how it should be, that people should have the freedom to do those kinds of things. But he like told me point blank that like that wasn't the viewpoint of our church, of the Catholic Church. And I wasn't welcome to go and I wasn't welcome to come back to catechism. So that was like the breaking point a little bit of like, whoa, like I'm not already, I don't know that I can talk to God and I can't ask questions in church. And I don't really feel like I'm like taught a lot of things, but I don't believe them. I don't understand them. So that was kind of like the strain. But I was a senior. I was getting ready to leave. So I went to Western, a university in our town in Kalamazoo, and went to a Catholic church here. But again, like didn't know anyone. And so I think in that first year, so I would have been like 17, 18 range, just had no roots. Like I didn't have any roots like in my belief in God necessarily, like belief in religion. I didn't have any community. And I felt like I wasn't necessarily wanted, or like questioning was absolutely not allowed. And I didn't know how I was going to get to the point of like devoted belief if I couldn't ask questions
Mhm.
and have someone kind of handle those questions with care and like really desire to teach me. So, yeah, I think in those early years of college, I really struggled. I really struggled with depression simultaneously too, which I think didn't help because I just felt really abandoned in a lot of ways, abandoned by God, people in the church.
That I can imagine that that would be hard. And, obviously, Ezra and I think community is super important.
Hmm.
You touched on the importance of community kind of in getting back. But, that's the other thing too. Jesus was a teacher, right?
Hmm.
And Jesus still teaches us through the Holy Spirit. So it's
Right.
good to have questions. It's good to wrestle
Hmm.
and to have these things that it's like, we don't know all the answers and we're never going to until we
Hmm.
get to heaven.
Right.
But if we don't have leaders that we can talk to, if we can't have these conversations with the Holy Spirit, with Jesus, if we can't
Hmm.
pray and really like wrestle some of these things out with God, like
Yeah.
how are we supposed to grow? So
Right.
I can only imagine, how hard that was.
Hmm.
So after you went through your breakup
Yeah.
and, you kind of felt God tugging on you to come back, what was kind of the sequence of events that led to your, I guess, your fire for the Lord? I
Okay.
know you attended VFC for kind of one of our bigger holiday events,
I
and
did.
that was kind of your first introduction to our church,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah. So our church is a decent size and we do like an Easter production. And so this year it was called The Greatest Showman, loosely based off of the movie for Easter. And so I didn't come like Easter weekend. I think it was like we had ran the production like every weekend in April. So it was like the last weekend in April. But I went, how did I even get there? Okay. So one of the physical therapists that I worked with at the clinic, she was going through a breakup. Like that Friday they broke up. We were really close. She was like, I can't go to his home church, but I need to go to church on Sunday. And I, as a friend, was like, oh, I'll go with you, like not really knowing. And I didn't even really know much about like her religion either, like, which I laugh because I'm like, not that it would have mattered, but like if I would have had to go to like a mosque, like I wouldn't have had any idea what I was doing. But so we go to church together on Sunday and it happens to be VFC where we go. And um, we pull in and like she, I don't think she knew that they were doing an Easter production, but like we go, it's a grand church. It's much larger than my like 150
It's
people
a mega
max.
church. I think it's like legitimately listed as a mega church on Wikipedia. So
Yeah, you're not wrong. And so we go in, it's just grand. There's people everywhere and like people are talking to like it was a lot of things I'd never seen before. People were talking to each other. There was laughter. There was like kids of all ages running around. And so we walk in and my friend is like a little she's somber because she's going through a breakup. And so we go and I assume we're gonna sit like further back, but we sit on the floor, like so close to the stage. And, I don't have a Bible, I don't have a journal, like I just don't know what I'm doing. And so worship starts and it's like the production. And then, there's like the lifting of the hands. And mind you, like in Catholic faith, like we have a book, you have like the words in front of you. It's very, it's not like it's worshipful, but I don't know. It's very like classical sounding. So it was all very new. Yeah. So that was the first time I came to VFC, but I gave my life to the Lord that day. Pastor Beth spoke. Yeah. And then, but in terms of community, so I went in with a friend and then I walk out and I met the girls that ended up baptizing me. And I joined a small group that day. So like they're called V groups, our small group, and met like some of my dearest friends. If and when I get married, like I would ask them to like be in my wedding. And we all live in like different parts of the country now, but so I met my people that day, which was great.
that's super, super cool. That's an
Yeah.
awesome story. That gets me fired up, especially, having been at VFC for forever and just seeing, that impact. And now you're working there, which is
Yeah.
super,
It's
super cool.
crazy. Yeah.
So what does kind of community in the spirit and community in the church look like for you now?
Mhm.
What are you doing to stay involved outside of just work and to allow yourself to kind of be fed and encouraged, and then also to encourage other people?
So I think it looks a lot like I'm stepping into some roles where I can kind of lead and like open up those spaces for other people, which I think is great. I think a lot of it is serving in youth. So I think that's really important in working ministry, also serving in ministry and in the area that you're not working in. So I'm super grateful. We have a really healthy, thriving youth ministry. So I love working there. And then in that, I get to kind of be around like Brian and like peers, like people my age who are like fighting the good fight and like where we get to just see each other like every week and kind of put our hands and hearts to like what's going on in our church. So I love that. I'm also a part of a small group, two small groups actually, of like different age ranges. But the nice thing is, I think just in coming to a church that prioritizes community, like I've learned to just value relationship differently. So even if there's not like, so my friends, so just naturally, like my friend group looks different than what it used to. So I have like amazing godly women around me. And I swear, like every Sunday, like another one gets added to it. Or not even every Sunday, like every week. So I love that. I love that about our church. I think we have like an amazing pool of like girls and guys too. But I love that. I think it just looks like bringing more people in and just like really believing the Lord to like not let up in that area. Like I think sometimes in our 20s or really at any age, you can think like, I have enough friends or like no new friends, you know? But I don't think that's how kingdom works. And so I love just having people with just different perspectives who love the Lord in just different ways than I do and are either further along than me. And so, yeah.
That's super cool. And I like what you said about people who kind of love the Lord in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's really a good spot. Eric Jones and I have talked about this a little bit, just in that like we can get in and read the Bible, and we really like to like know the Bible, and we like to study it, and like that's just kind of me. I'm going to go to school for a very long time. I like to study. I like to read. I like to learn things.
Yeah.
And Eric could relate to me like in that way. But talking to him about, you know, his wife Alexa and just like her passion for a relationship with Jesus and like really having like intimate prayer time with him and those kind of things, the value of like learning from somebody like that so that we can add to our spiritual lives and we can see that example and kind of the areas that we may not be as in touch with, I think is super valuable. That's like a really good aspect of community as well.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think even as you said that, it made me think of because Christianity has a culture. And so I think sometimes too, like I've had to, and because I have such a religious background and I've spent more of my life in that space than in my like new creation space, that I am like cognizant of like putting that on sometimes and like putting on Christian culture because there's a way that you can look and talk and study and like do all the things where they're good objective things, but if you like make them legalistic, then you just take Jesus out of it entirely. And so I love like having those different perspectives, but like also just staying so close to like, it doesn't make me any better to know Jesus now, like just being close to my salvation story in the sense of like, I need a savior just as much today as I did like 4 years ago. And it's a story that it's the truth that's available to everyone, not just me or people that are in my church or people in my friend group or, you know, people who don't drink or like, you know, all the things that we can kind of throw at people. So I think that's something I try to like hold close to and I'm becoming more aware of just in working in ministry and like trying to let the Holy Spirit kind of work in my heart and like uncover that where I just label people wrongly. Yeah.
So do you still have friends that you talk to from kind of like your before Christianity days? And if so, like, what do those relationships look like now? Have you faced any pushback or judgment from them? And how do you kind of handle those relationships now that things have changed for you?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I wouldn't say like I had a large friend group prior to knowing the Lord. And honestly, the very first prayer that I ever prayed was in 2016, maybe 15. And I didn't even know who I was, if anyone heard me or who I was talking to, but I just cried out like, God, where are my people? Like, where are my people? And, you know, fast forward years later, he answered. But like, I played a lot of sports in high school. And so I feel like I am one of those kids. I think a lot of people can relate to this. Like, I had friends because I had teammates. And then college happened and I had some mental health issues and just I wasn't really interested in what everyone else was doing. Like, you know, I went to a school that's kind of known for partying and things. And like, that wasn't really my scene. I'm very introverted. So I struggled a bit. So I don't have a lot of friends that like I stayed connected with. I do have a couple that live in like different states that I do talk to. And like every time I see them, I invite them to like, usually they're in town on the weekends. And so like they know where I work, they know what I do, and they know what I prioritize like on Sundays. And I'm like that friend that's like, do you want to go to church? Always. And so yeah, we stay in contact and like I'm in their life and they're in mine and I love it. But I think the area of like relationship I've seen the most like pushback is my family. And not like I say that loosely. I think just like not understanding like some people in my family don't have a personal relationship with the Lord yet. So I think even in going into ministry, seeing it as like more than just a job, but like as a calling, it's just been interesting to have like those conversations with them and like a little heartbreaking.
Yeah, no, that's super cool. So I just want to ask you a couple questions kind of about working in ministry, just real quick, because
Yeah.
Ezra and I have talked a little bit on this podcast about kind of how we have entered into our callings and kind of figured out what we feel God is calling us to. And we both, love the Lord and we serve at the church and we do this podcast, but we don't feel that ministry is, where God is calling us. So I just want to know, what are your thoughts on serving in ministry? Like, what are the things that you like about it? And then anybody that's on the fence, like, do I go into ministry, or, I have something else that maybe I could do or that I want to do? Like, what would be your advice to somebody kind of struggling, trying to figure out what they want to do?
Yeah. So I'll preface it by saying I've only been in ministry 8 months, less than a year. But I will say because it was not something, I think there's a temptation with our generation, maybe younger, we are so passionate about Jesus that I think there's this weird misunderstanding that, like, if you're passionate about Jesus, the only way you can bring him glory is if you have a career, your calling needs to be in ministry. And when I say ministry, it needs to be in the walls of the church. And that's just a lie from the pit of hell. Like, that is not true at all. And so I think just get really, like, for one, get clear about that, accept that, work that out with the Lord. Like, if you are feeling that pull, but also, like, if you are feeling that, like, call to ministry, I I know everyone always says, like, did you pray about it? But like, honestly, like, talk to God and ask like some really honest questions. Because I didn't have any context to it really, like, I asked the Lord and write them down too, guys. Like, I wrote down like, Lord, are you like specifically, Lord, are you calling me to ministry? If so, like vocational ministry, or are you just saying like ministry of reconciliation? Because, like, yes, like, can I get clarity on that? If so, like, what are my giftings? Like, who are you calling me to? And like, and where is it, like in a nonprofit organization? And I would say do the things in the supernatural, but also like take steps in the natural. Like, talk to wise counsel about it. If you can bring your pastors into it, and not too many people, but I think find like two or three solid people in your life that can kind of walk you through this season of like wrestling with the Lord about a call to ministry. And also, I think like don't be afraid to like let the call die a little bit, because I think, initially when I like mentioned earlier, like that calling verse, I could have like picked that up and ran with it at the time, but years passed before like I ever circled back to it. So I think that's okay. Like, just because you have the calling doesn't negate its truth at all if like you don't jump into it right away. And most likely you won't, and you shouldn't. Like, there's a preparation that should happen and take place beforehand. So lean into the process just as much as like you're leaning in to the calling, if that makes sense. But yeah, I think just do a lot of the back end work like through prayer. Ask like really honest questions. Because the reality is, like, God can get glory like right where you're at. And so regardless if you're working in the walls of a church or not, there's people to reach, and we're all called to that. And so don't put a limit on what that looks like. And yeah, I think those would be like my handles. I would,
I think that that's super good. And that's
yeah,
kind of like what Ezra and I have echoed with our callings, just, outside of ministry. And again, if you're not called into ministry, like, you will go into places that pastors aren't able to go to. You'll be able to reach
right.
people that would never step inside a church on their own. So
Yeah.
I think that that's good advice. And I think that's awesome. And, your story's super cool and I'm super encouraged by it. And I'm
Thanks.
stoked that you came on here.
Thanks. Me too. Yeah, this was great to have a conversation with you.
Thank you all so much for tuning in today. We hope that you enjoyed the episode. Don't forget to follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. Have a great week as you go and love God and love people. We will see you back here next Tuesday.